Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MASSCAP Training Center's ROMA 101 webinar. We're so happy to have two certified ROMA trainers, Kathy Apostolaris and John Cuneo, who will present a compelling and interesting overview of ROMA. My name is Patricia Pelletier, and I am the planner at MASSCAP, the Mass Association for Community Action. Before we start, I just wanted to go over a few technical instructions for the webinar. So if you can hear me, then you probably have figured out how to use your computer's audio option. And if you can't hear me, then what I'm saying doesn't really matter. So hopefully folks are reading these instructions to see the phone number to call if you're not hearing me over their computer. If you're on the phone and can hear me, please be sure to mute your phone so we don't hear any of your background noise. And from time to time, we'll be pausing for questions, but at any time, please feel free to type your questions or comments in the chat box on your screen. I'll be monitoring the chat box and we'll answer as many questions as we can today, but if we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up later. So we're going to start with a little poll to see who knows what the acronym ROMA stands for. Paula Ho, who is our technical webinar director, will be putting up a poll that you can click on and answer some questions. And I think I'm not seeing the poll, but I think hopefully you can. So who knows what the acronym ROMA stands for? Is it Results of Massachusetts Action, Real Outcomes for Management and Accountability, Results-Oriented Management and Accountability, or Results-Oriented Mandated Accounting? So we're going to give you a second to take a look at that and answer that poll. And I'm going to see, and pardon me if we have a little delay trying to, oh, there it is, trying to get the results of the poll. So far we have 57% of you have voted. So if you could all take a minute to answer that question, what does ROMA mean? ROMA. Okay, 71% of people have voted. We'll give another half a minute to see, and then we'll show you the results of the poll. All right, so we here's the results of the poll. You are all absolutely perfect students. 100% of folks knew that ROMA means the results-oriented management and accountability, which is this great little symbol that we see here that represents, I think, our ROMA logo. So thanks all. You all passed the test, which means we can move on to the next section. Of course, I'm only kidding. So I want to first introduce our presenters. Kathy Apostolaris, who is a nationally certified ROMA trainer, who is currently working as a consultant to community action agencies from her home near Asheville, North Carolina. She has 8 years of experience working as a planner for the Community Action Agency in North Central Massachusetts, where she was responsible for annual CSBG reporting requirements, triennial community action activities, among other things. Kathy has a bachelor's degree from Princeton University, and she is a mother of 2 young children and the proud wife of a tireless advocate for the healthcare needs of underserved populations. Thank you, Kathy, for joining us today. And John Cuneo is currently the Executive Director of Community Action, Inc. of Haverhill, Massachusetts. John has served as CAI's Executive Director since 1996, and before that, John served at CAI in 3 prior positions dating back to 1983. He began his career at another community action in Massachusetts in 1972, working there for 2.5 years. John has a BA degree from Middlebury College and an MA degree from Penn State University, and is also a nationally certified ROMA trainer. So here's John, who will identify what the learning objectives are for the webinar and just start us off on this ROMA training. Thank you.
Hi folks, welcome to the webinar. These learning objectives came straight from the MASSCAP Planners Group. We hope that the webinar today gives you a basic understanding of ROMA and can serve as a jumping off point for more in-depth ROMA training in the future. As a result of this webinar, we hope that Massachusetts Community Action staff will be able to define ROMA and understand its purpose and the legislative requirements associated with it, identify the phases of the ROMA cycle, understand the connection between ROMA, the 6 national goals, and the national performance indicators, and understand the connection between ROMA, DHCD's triennial CAP or Community Action Plan, and the annual work plan processes and general community action agency planning activities. Right now we're going to talk a little bit about the history of community action as it relates to ROMA. While we were waiting, people were thinking and some were sharing, we hope, their thoughts and memories about what was going on and what was important to them back in 1964, important to them or their families, and when the community action movement was born. I'm just looking to see if anybody did type in any chat items. Doesn't look like it as far as I can see. So I'll tell you a little bit about some things that I'm aware of. The Ford Mustang was introduced. Martin Luther King received the Nobel Peace Prize. Lyndon Johnson defeated Barry Goldwater. And if you were in New York like me at the time, you went to the World's Fair. But most important from the standpoint of this webinar and much of our work is that the Economic Opportunity Act was passed. It created the Community Action Network and established a focus for community action agencies, which distinguished them from other human service organizations. Specifically, community action agencies were to focus on individual and family self-sufficiency, community revitalization, mobilization of resources for anti-poverty purposes, working in partnership and collaboration with other organizations, and agency accountability. For those of you who are familiar with the 6 national goals, which we'll talk about more a little later in this webinar, you can see how these original focus areas provided the roots for those goals. And they've stayed consistent through the life of community action. Then in 1974, the Economic Opportunity Act was terminated and replaced with the Community Services Act. Nothing materially changed from one piece of legislation to the other, meaning the original intent of the legislation remained the same. But the name change may unfortunately have misled some community action leaders and participants into focusing less on creating opportunities to promote self-sufficiency and more on simply providing services. In 1981, the Community Services Act was replaced by the Community Services Block Grant. Again, the original purpose of community action agencies remained essentially unchanged, but the regulatory and funding structure of community action changed. State offices were installed and were made in charge of, or given the responsibility for, distributing funds to local agencies. In 1993, the Government Performance and Results Act, GEPRA, or GEPRA, was passed as part of a renewed emphasis on accountability in the Clinton-Gore era. GEPRA called for a focus on results, service quality, and customer satisfaction, not just program delivery. And it made reporting and monitoring functions of the federal government. GEPRA didn't just target community action, it was applied to all government programs, but it did serve as a step toward correcting community action's course after some agencies shifted their focus to providing services, as I just mentioned, instead of creating opportunity when the legislation's name changed in '74 from economic opportunity to community services. In 1994, the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force was created by the Office of Community Services to explore the results that had been achieved by community action agencies across the country. The Monitoring and Assessment Task Force included local community action agency directors, state office staff, association staff, consultants, and others working in the field. The purpose was to find compelling ways of talking about the achievements of community action agencies. During their work, the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force produced a national strategic plan that identified 6 national goals for community action. In addition, the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force also identified a performance-based system of management and accountability that they called ROMA, or Results-Oriented Management and Accountability. At this point in community action history, agencies voluntarily implemented ROMA to improve their own results and their ability to track and report their successes. It wasn't until 1998, during the reauthorization of the Community Services Block Grant Act, that language was incorporated into the legislation mandating the use of ROMA and outcome reporting for all community action agencies. And it wasn't until 2005 that the first ROMA-related reports were actually due. Does anyone have a question so far? We'd like to stop for a moment and see if you have any. Please type them in the chat box and we'll give you a minute to do that.
Okay, so this is Pat again. As I said, I'll be kind of monitoring the questions. So if you do have a question or a comment even, just feel free to type in the chat box. We'll give you a second to do that. And while we're waiting for folks to do that, I wanted to let you know that on your control panel, you might see a little tab for handouts, and it says 1. So you will, if you click on that, you're able to download this PowerPoint presentation, and so you can do that at any time you'd like. So it looks like we have one question, and if it says, if the state was not established until the early 80s, how did the local community action agencies relate to the federal government before that? So if one of our panelists, John, if you wanted to answer that question.
Sure. It's basically, my understanding is that it was pretty similar to the way Head Start operates now. There were regional offices of the federal government, much like there's one in Boston for New England for Region 1. And community action agencies related to that regional office. So it was a direct federal to local relationship, which changed when we shifted to CSBG so that we had the states then delivering what used to be the Fed's responsibility in large part.
Okay, great. So I don't think there's any more questions. We can just move on.
Hi all, this is Kathy. I'm going to start by talking about what ROMA, or Results-Oriented Management and Accountability, is. We know that we're mandated to use it, but what is it actually? Even though many of us have probably fallen into this pattern of thinking and talking about ROMA, ROMA is not about reporting or a program. ROMA is a complete management and accountability process that's focused on the results achieved through your agency's activities. It provides the rationale for and identifies the results or outcomes of the services you provide. The 1998 CSBG reauthorization defined ROMA as a sound management practice that incorporates the use of outcomes or results into the administration, management, and operation of community action agencies. ROMA helps us answer the so what question. We all provide these services, so what? What actually changes in the lives of families, in the community, within the agency and our CAA network as a result of the programs and services we provide? Purposefully, methodically, and consistently incorporating ROMA principles into the planning, administration, management, and evaluation activities of community action agencies lets us tell our story and ultimately justify our existence, which is pretty important, particularly now, and particularly for a program like Community Services Block Grant, which was called out by President Obama in his first State of the Union address as a program that he was going to be looking carefully at. So, ROMA is about being able to demonstrate what we all know, that community action agencies change behaviors, conditions, and lives. ROMA is based on the writings of Peter Drucker, the world's most recognized management consultant in both the for and nonprofit sectors. Peter Drucker has been hailed in the U.S. and abroad as the seminal thinker, writer, and lecturer on the contemporary organization. He was featured in Forbes magazine, and Business Week called him the most enduring management thinker of our time. So ROMA is not just something that the Fed's made up to make our lives more difficult. It's actually has some legs to it. And it's based on the belief that the demand for the social sector to show results is not a passing trend. So the core components of ROMA are reviewing the agency's mission, assessing community needs, developing results-oriented plans, evaluating performance using outcomes and indicators, and managing performance using logic models. And just a quick note here on the last bullet regarding logic models. The use of logic models to plan, manage, and assess programs and agencies is a huge focus of ROMA. In fact, there's an 8-hour training which John and I offer that culminates in the development of logic model. But given our limited time today, we're not going to talk much about logic models except really to share some resources with you at the end of this PowerPoint related to logic modeling. This is the ROMA psychographic. It was developed in 2006 to make these core components easier to understand and to demonstrate the fluidity between the components and their cyclical or ongoing nature. Typically, when we're talking about the cycle, we start at the top with the assessment phase. This can be the big triennial community assessment that we all do, which gets incorporated into our community action plan, or it can be a smaller specific need or program area focused assessment. After we identify a need, we plan what we're going to do to address that need. Key here, because ROMA is a results-focused framework, is that we back into our strategy by first identifying our intended result. So for example, if during our assessment we identify healthy food options as a need in our community, and our intended result is for residents to have the skills to grow their own produce, we would select a strategy related to teaching and enabling gardening. Whereas if our intended result was to increase the healthy food options at supermarkets and corner stores, we would select an advocacy strategy targeting local store owners. So see how the intended result dictates the strategy. Also important here in the planning phase is that we only implement strategies which align with our agency's mission. This will help us to stay focused and to target our resources in a way that moves us toward achieving our mission. During implementation, the next phase, it's critical that we ensure systems are in place to collect data related to service provision as well as client outcomes. How do our clients, their lives, or the conditions they live in change as a result of the service we provided them? We cannot simply count the number of people who attended adult basic education classes. We have to have some mechanism in place to measure knowledge or skills gained through participation in the classes, or changes in employment status or income as a result of their increased education. We have to be diligent about recording those outcomes in the achievement of results phase, and we have to evaluate or analyze our results periodically so that we know if our programs and services are actually meeting the benchmarks and outcomes we intended. Part of this analysis may also be looking at whether the need that we built our program to address still exists in the community. All of which brings us full circle and back up to the top to the assessment phase.
Sorry, I'm at the wrong box. Hang on a sec. So we're at why bother? My apologies for that. It's easy and tempting to reduce ROMA to this 5-step cycle, or to think and talk about it as a process or a procedure. But what it really does, and the reason why the ROMA folks, us included, get so excited about it, yes, believe it or not, we can get excited about it, is that it gives us community action professionals a way to understand and to talk about our successes. We as a network are notoriously bad at publicizing our achievements, no doubt in part due to the fact that the actual work of moving people towards self-sufficiently is, as you all know, quite literally endless, so that there's no time to stop and celebrate, even though at the end of the day that will help us if we do that. So take heed. Not to mention, there's not a lot of money around for celebrating, so we have to do it on the cheap. Yet being able to articulate the real changes that we help to bring about in people's lives and in communities is the very thing that is going to get us more money, which will buy us more time. Let's understand a little bit about what success means in other fields. Here's a quick activity to show you how important outcome tracking is to understanding what success looks like in our industry or in any other. I'll read the bullet, and you all will have about 15 seconds to chime in through the chat box about what you think success looks like in these industries. 1 in how many movies make a profit? Come on, folks, let's go. How many movies? Okay, it's 1 in 6, or 16.7% of movies make a profit. That's not very many movies for the number of movies that are put out. Let's try another industry. 1 in how many music recordings make a profit? Surely there must be a musician out there who knows the answer to this question. I'll give you a little bit more time to think about it. I'll even take a guess. One in 20 or 5% of music recordings makes a profit. I got to tell that to my son. Let's try another industry. A railroad delivery is considered on time if it is within how many hours of the scheduled time? Do you know? Do you have a guess? Pop it into the chat box. A railroad delivery is considered on time if it is within 24 hours or 1 day of the scheduled time. That explains some things to me. Sears, where are you? Where's my mower part? In baseball, one hit in how many times at bat is a superstar? Or maybe not a superstar, but a really good player. If you're wondering where the chat box is, you should be able to pull it out on the right-hand side of your screen by pushing a tab that will just be at the very top of what constitutes the control bar or the control box for you. If you just see a little like a totem pole, then you need to push the topmost button, which is on my screen anyway, orange, and an arrow pointing to the left or to the far side of the screen. Pop that and then look down, and you can see at the top it'll probably say File, View, Help if you've got a similar display to mine. And under View, if you look on that tab and pull down, you can see the word chat and a little space next to it. Click that and it will open the chat box for you if you don't already have it open. It should be all the way at the bottom of your screen, pretty much to the very bottom right of your screen if you have the control panel open. Anyway, in baseball, one hit in every 3 times at bat is a really good player, if not a superstar. These industries have tracked their results for so long that they can say with confidence what success looks like for them. And success isn't always a big number, as you could see. Only 5% of music recordings make a profit. And batting once every 3 times at bat, or 33% of the time, puts you in the superstar category. Can you believe that, Tom Brady? Those guys are getting off easy compared to your averages. These guys get paid millions of dollars to get 1 hit every 3 times they are up. Imagine if Tom Brady only completed 1 out of every 3 passes. It'd be awful. Crazy, but everyone knows it because baseball has been tracking data and reporting their successes for over 100 years. ROMA is the tool that will allow community action to be able to communicate our outcomes definitively so that the government and funders, and we too, will know realistically what success looks like for us. I want to talk with you a little bit about efficient and effective planning. ROMA helps us to be efficient and effective in our planning. For example, if an RFR or an RFP or a NOFA tells us that in order to be a strong candidate for adult education funding, we need to develop a program that will assist 20 people in securing employment, then we can use historical data to determine how many people we need to enroll to achieve that benchmark. For this example, let's suppose that we have several years' worth of adult basic ed data, which shows that only 50% of our adult basic ed clients ultimately pass their HiSET, or General Equivalency Diploma, and that only 50% of those who do pass their HiSET go on to secure employment. From that, we can work backwards. We need to end up with 20 participants securing employment. So we need twice that number, or 40, to pass the HiSET. Because we said only 50% of those who get their diploma secure employment. And in order for 40 to pass their HiSET, working backwards, we need 80 to enroll. Because again, we said that only 50% of enrollees get their diplomas. So those of us writing the grant application know that we have to develop a program that can enroll 80 people. We can take this example one step further. If we know that we need to enroll 80 people in order to assist 20 in securing employment, then we can also figure out how many resources like staff, participant manuals, and space we need to budget for in our proposal. The more data we have, the more effective we can be in our planning, and the more effective we can be in our implementation. I want to talk a little bit about performance targeting now. Did you know that our agency's planners, some of you are planners out there, are unofficially judged on how effective they are at planning? You know, in the work plan, when we have to justify any discrepancy of greater than 20% plus or minus, what DHCD is doing there is testing how effective we are at planning. How well do we know our programs and what success looks like within those programs? If at year end, our actual outcome is more than 20% different than what we predicted when developing the work plan, well, DHCD wants to know that we know why. So let's go back to our ABE example from earlier on. We said that we were going to enroll 80 participants, and that of those, 20 were ultimately going to secure employment. However, let's imagine that when we get to year end, only 5% have secured, or only 5 students have secured employment, or 5, the actual number, divided by 20, our target, means that we only achieved 25% of what we had anticipated, where there was a 75% discrepancy between what we targeted, which was 20, and what we achieved, which was 5. DHCD, and we too, are going to want to know why, or what's the explanation for that discrepancy, because that's a pretty large one. The justification could be any number of things, that we only got 1/4 of the funding that we expected, which, if we were smart, we would have indicated that if we only get 1/4 of our funding, we're only going to achieve 1/4 of what we had projected for results. Or that we had a staffing issue which resulted in a shorter than anticipated project period. The justification doesn't seem to matter that much so long as it's more sophisticated than we didn't know what to expect, especially if this is an ongoing program where we have a history. DHCD wants to know, and we do too, the public certainly does, that we know our programming well enough to know what our success rate should be. And the only way to do that is to consistently track and analyze data through a mechanism or a process like ROMA. To be honest, I'm uncertain where the plus or minus 20% comes from. It seems a bit arbitrary. It might vary according to situation, for example, how new and untried, as I've mentioned previously, or how complex and dependent on other independent variables or factors the particular program that we're talking about is. So what would have been within 20% discrepancy in the example that I've talked about, the 80 initially enrolled and the 20 students at the end of the process. Well, plus or minus 20% of 20 securing employment would be somewhere in the range of 16 to 24. Does anybody have a question so far? We'd like to stop for a moment and see if there are any questions. We've covered some ground now, and we'd like to know if you have any questions or comments, an area that you'd particularly like us to spend a little more time on. Please type it in the chat box. We'll give you a minute to do that.
Hi, this is Patricia Pelletier again. Just to let you know, on your screen it may be called a questions box. I think in some it's called chat, and some others it's called question. I think folks are having someone had said they were having a hard time finding the chat box. So maybe it's called questions. So take a look and see if that's what it is, and feel free to type in any questions right now or any thoughts. We'll give you a couple seconds to do that, or a minute or so. Feel free, and I'll be monitoring them, and when they come in, I will ask our panelists. Okay, I know someone's got questions.
This is called the Wednesday afternoon slump.
Yeah.
Come on.
Okay, we have one question. Someone said, in reporting on our work plan to DHCD, I often struggle to come up with justifications for discrepancies of greater than 20%. What are some common justifications that other people use? So
I can answer that. I have 8 years of experience making up, I shouldn't say making up, of coming up with those justifications. And really, if anybody else has some that they want to pop into the chat or the question box, please do. But in my experience, it's helpful to start by looking at what happened over the course of the reporting period with funding, staff, and partners. I'll typically ask program staff whether there was additional funding or a cut in funding that could account for exceeding or failing to meet the target. If not, I'll ask whether there was a staff vacancy which was hard to fill and so the program didn't meet its target, or conversely, whether there was a new staff person who came on with additional skills who helped to make the program more productive. And if neither of those give me the answer that I'm looking for, I'll ask staff whether we face challenges with a partner. Sometimes partners need to decrease productivity, or on the flip side, if we took on a new partner who helped us increase our capacity to serve clients, that might have helped us exceed our target. So typically there's a legitimate justification in one of these three areas: funding, staff, and partners.
Okay, that's great. I don't see any other questions, so we can move on, John.
Hi there. I need control of my screen. I guess I must have it. How about that? I'll get it. There we go. But let me back up one. What outcomes are most important to community action agencies? During the history lesson that we started with today, we talked about the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 and the focuses or foci that it set forth for community action agencies. Those were individual and family self-sufficiency, community revitalization, mobilization of resources for anti-poverty purposes, working in partnership and collaboration with other organizations, and finally, agency accountability. From this original list, we can see that family, community, and agency goals and outcomes are critical for community action. All agencies must work to bring about change in these three primary areas: family, community, and agency. The 6 national goals developed in 1994 by that Monitoring and Assessment Task Force cover these 3 areas, namely family, community, and agency. And they provide a framework within which nearly all activity is conducted in a community action agency. Later on, if you want to look more at that, you can go back to slide 9 and take a look at that. Family goals and outcomes describes the transition toward and the achievement of self-sufficiency or economic security. They also describe achievement of potential to become self-sufficient by obtaining supports like employment, increased income, or housing. So the first part of that comment or that statement that I just made was about family, which is goal 1, And the latter part about achieving those things and getting the potential to do it is Goal 6. It's a family Goal 6. Community goals and outcomes describe the ability of the CAA to mobilize public and private community resources that support low-income persons in their transition to self-sufficiency. The use of those resources to improve community infrastructure and the involvement of low-income persons in community organizations and activities. The community goals are numbers 2 and 3. Agency goals and outcomes describe the capacity or capability of the community action agency to collaborate with other programs, with other providers of services to low-income people, and to use sound management practices in the delivery of programs and services. The agency goals are numbers 4 and 5. So how do we know if we're achieving these goals? As community action agencies, we are all required to report on a set of outcome indicators called the National Performance Indicators, or NPIs. Required to report is the nub, or is it the nub, of the ROMA reporting identity. Remember earlier, I think it was Kathy who talked about how ROMA is not just a reporting activity. It's an entire management process. National performance indicators were developed to strike a balance between the need for community action agencies to be responsive to local needs and develop local programming, and the need for uniform accounting of the impact of community action agencies across the country. We capitalize upon our individuality and our ability to respond to local needs, but at the same time, if we're going to be able to measure that across the country and be able to come up with substantive statements about what we're accomplishing in a broad sense, we need to be able to bridge that gap. NPIs are intended to capture outcomes from programs funded by the Community Services Block Grant, as well as all other funding sources supporting an agency. The federal government also recognizes that NPIs only reflect a portion of the work and accomplishments of community action agencies. That's why community action agencies are encouraged to report annually on their full range of outcomes in addition to the required NPIs. National performance indicators and sub-indicators are changed periodically in response to feedback provided from the field and to capture outcomes related to some major focus, such as ARA, or to meet other network needs. In fact, they're under revision as we speak, as ROMA 2.0 is being developed. That's ROMA Next Generation. One complaint about the current set of MPIs is that it uses a lot of output language versus outcome language. Both outputs and outcomes are important accountability measures within ROMA. Output measures a program's process, the number of people who participate, the number of classes that are offered, whereas outcomes measure a program's success, how participants' lives were actually changed as a result of participation. It's that movement from effort to effect. What are we doing and what effect is it having? What impact are we achieving? It's important for community action agencies to track both, though it's really the reporting of the outcomes that is going to provide the compelling case for ongoing funding. That's why the folks who are working to revise the MPIs as part of ROMA 2.0 Next Generation are focusing on incorporating more outcome language. It's now Kathy's turn to talk about how to apply these principles in our everyday work lives. Take it away, Kathy.
Thanks, John. So at this point, I'm hoping that the connection between ROMA and the tasks that many of us do on a daily basis is becoming clear, if it wasn't already for you. Many of you probably associate the National Performance Indicators, or the NPIs, with DHCD's annual work plan. The work plan, along with our triennial community action plan, are tools that our state agency has developed to assist Massachusetts community action agencies in implementing ROMA. Other states have different systems in place. These tools are not in and of themselves ROMA. If we go back to the ROMA cycle graphic, we can see, though, how these activities are nested within the ROMA cycle. Starting at the top, as we talked about before, we have assessment. If we're talking about the big picture, this is our triennial community needs assessment. During the needs assessment, we gather data from various stakeholder groups, including our clients, and we review secondary data sources to get a sense of the ongoing needs in our communities, as well as the resources or gaps in resources available to address those needs. Then, during the planning phase, we analyze the data in the context of our mission and decide what concrete impacts we want to make over the next 3 years within our agency, on our community, and for our clients. We develop strategies and set benchmarks within our triennial community action plan. In order to make sure that we are on track to meet the benchmarks set forth in the CAP, we develop annual work plans, which provide more detail about how we're going to implement our programs, who and how big the intended target audience is, and what outcomes we expect them to achieve. From these work plans, we implement our programming, and we track output and outcome data as we go along for the reasons that John just discussed. We then analyze or evaluate this data as part of our mid-year and year-end progress reports to DHCD. So that was the big picture. ROMA can also be used at the program level as part of general planning activities, and not just by the agency's planning department staff, but also by program directors and frontline staff. Let's go through the ROMA cycle again from this sort of more general planning perspective. Assessment. This could be something like a client satisfaction survey, which shows an overwhelming need in a particular area. So for example, let's say that 80% of the client satisfaction surveys your agency administered this spring identified the need for more affordable housing. A team of staff might take that piece of data and do some planning. Planning to develop a program that increases access to affordable housing. This could include researching best practices, recruiting partners, allocating staff time and/or financial resources, etc. Once the program, whatever it is developed, you implement it, making sure to document the achievement of results by collecting output and outcome data, which gets analyzed periodically through process and progress evaluation procedures. This evaluation, coupled with ongoing assessment of client satisfaction and other community and client data, helps your organization to assess the ongoing need for that program. And around we go again. Around we go again. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to break here for just 1 second, so we do have a little bit of time to see if there's a question or a comment that you'd like to share. We did talk about outcomes and outputs, which can be sort of confusing when you're not familiar with them. We talked about the big picture, the triennial community action plan that we do and how that overlaps with ROMA. We also talked about day-to-day activities that planners and program staff do and how that is nested with the ROMA cycle. If anybody has a question, feel free to pose it, and if not, we will keep going. We only have a couple of slides left.
Okay, hi, this is Pat again. We have one question. Will there be follow-up training on any of these ROMA topics?
Okay, well actually that will lead us into the next couple of slides, so why don't I keep on going. Okay, so this next slide is a list of resources that may be useful to you and your agencies as you work to more fully incorporate ROMA and ROMA principles into the work you do. IM 49, or Information Memorandum 49, was published by the Office of Community Services in 2001. It provides guidance to CSBG eligible entities on how they can use results-oriented management and accountability as, and I quote, an omnibus for mission renewal, improved service strategies, strong program and fiscal management, and ultimate accountability based on client and community change. We thought it might be interesting for you to go back to some of the original intent documents to see why and how ROMA started. The Drucker Institute has some interesting articles and various resources for and nonprofit entities related to management and accountability. Right now, the site seems to be talking a lot about data, which is very relevant to the work of community action agencies and our efforts to document and tell stories of our successes. You may want to poke around there a little bit. The Institute also has a self-assessment workbook, which we use in our full-day ROMA training. It can help organizations think about, like, what is our mission, who are our clients. As we said earlier, the National Performance Indicators are a common set of indicators that all community action agencies are required to report on. Each program in our annual work plan is tied to a National Performance Indicator. The link here will take you to a PDF, which you can save and pull up as needed. When we talked about the core components of ROMA, we very briefly mentioned logic models and the big role they play in ROMA. This link will take you to a sample logic model, which, with some minor modifications, could be used by your organization to plan programs or overall agency operations. Again, as we said earlier, there is an in-depth training that your staff could undergo to become more comfortable with logic models. John and I can do that. Next is a link to the National Association for State Community Service Programs, and I'm never sure how I'm supposed to pronounce the acronym, MASSCAP, I think, is working with the CSBG network next generation or the next level of ROMA principles, practices, and resources. Their site has links to a number of resources related to ROMA 2.0, including links to the work that's being done at the national level around articulating a theory of change for community action. We don't know, but we expect that theory of change and establishing a theory of change for your organization will be a key component to ROMA 2.0, so you may want to start learning and thinking about theory of change. And finally, the website of the Association of Nationally Certified ROMA Trainers is useful if you're interested in becoming a ROMA trainer yourself. You can find a description of the training program there. You can also find a list of nationally certified ROMA trainers in Massachusetts and neighboring states. This may be useful when you're in the midst of your CSBG organizational standards self-assessment and you get to standard 4.3 and you realize that you need to have a relationship with a trainer. Both John and I are on that list and are happy to discuss how we can be assistance to you and your agencies. Okay, so we hope that today's webinar has, first and foremost, accomplished the 4 learning objectives that we set forth at the beginning of the hour. We also hope that we've piqued interest in at least 1 or 2 or more of you to learn more about ROMA. If so, as certified ROMA trainers, we can provide a full-day 7-module ROMA training. This training includes a more detailed history of the community action movement and ROMA than we gave today, as well as discussion of mission, community assessments, and outcome setting and measuring. It culminates in the development of a logic model, which is an important tool in ROMA. This full-day training is probably most appropriate for senior level management, planners and program directors, but if you have board members who work in the field or who are savvy in the area of program implementation, they could also benefit. With some advance notice, we could develop shorter specialized trainings on topics like mission, developing and measuring outcomes using outcome scales, and logic modeling. These trainings could be provided to program directors and frontline staff. And relatedly, as I mentioned a minute ago, there's a new requirement for agencies per the CSBG organizational standards to utilize the service of a ROMA trainer in community action planning processes and beyond. Specifically, organizational standard 4.3 states that the organization must document having used the services of a ROMA certified trainer to assist in implementation. None of us really know what that means yet or what it's going to look like, but know that John and I are both available should your organization need our services to satisfy this requirement. And with that, I will say thank you for joining us today, and we'll leave you with our contact information. But before I go, I would be remiss, particularly as a ROMA trainer, if I didn't encourage you to complete the evaluation survey that you'll be receiving following the webinar. It will help us as the presenters and the MASSCAP Training Center staff to know whether we have accomplished what we hope to today and to prepare for future webinars. So please do respond to the survey, and thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. This is Patricia Pelletier again. This concludes our webinar today. Please stay tuned for future ROMA trainings, either in the form of webinars or face-to-face trainings that will be announced in our MASSCAP Training Center newsletters that Paula publishes every couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for those, and we will see you around. Take good care.